and thank you for being here this evening. My name is Elaine Johnson, and I'm on the executive committee for the NAACP, the local chapter here in Santa Cruz. And I'm excited to be here this evening with all of you as we continue to celebrate Black History Month. Tonight, we're in for a treat. Our guest speaker for this evening is Dr. David Anthony. I'll share a little bit about who Dr. Anthony is so we can save the space up for him to talk. And Dr. David Anthony is a professor of history, African American history at UCSC Santa Cruz. He was born in New York City. He graduated from NYU and earned his master's and PhD at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He has taught at Copen State College, now a university, the University of Oregon, and since 1988 has been at the University of Santa Cruz. He has done field work in Tanzania and South Africa. Some journals of publications include African Studies Review, Social Sciences and Missions, Journal of Religion in Africa, Journal of Angelan Studies, among others. Dr. Anthony is also co-director of the Howard University Research Project, African American Historical Lineages with South Africa. Professor Anthony is a leader in campus public service and has participated in a broad range of events such as film screenings, public talks, and exhibitions, including the UC Santa Cruz annual Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Convocation. Dr. Anthony also has an affinity for film and music and archives media ranging from African folk to contemporary jazz. Dr. Anthony plays both saxophone and flute. And I would like to give it just a personal shout out. He's a friend, he's a brother, he's a mentor. I've known him for about 15 years, living here in Santa Cruz from New York City myself. I know we're in for a great treat tonight. So let's sit back and I'm gonna open it up for Dr. Anthony to speak this evening. Thank you, Dr. Anthony, for being here with us.
Thank you very much, Sister Elaine, and good evening, everyone. Welcome. Thank you all for coming to join us in this conversation tonight. It was extremely kind of you to devote this precious time after work when you could be relaxing, communing with family and friends, or simply unwinding. Before I begin, I want to offer a kind of a friendly amendment to the title that initially advertised this talk in terms of my own position. I'm an associate professor in the Department of History at UCSC. My specialties include African and African American history. I teach courses and do research and write on Africa and its diasporas. Or areas of dispersal of African-derived peoples, particularly what have come to be designated as the Black Atlantic and Indian Ocean worlds. Together, these areas of specialization form part of what can be identified as African studies. UCSC has a growing cohort of faculty who have varying degrees of experience in Africana or African studies. To date, though, there is neither an African studies major, program, nor department. There is, however, a very new Black Studies minor, and each identifier signifies something unique. And I also want to say there are only 2 people of African descent who are in that department. Since my arrival in Santa Cruz to teach at UCSC in 1988, I've taught lectures and seminars that fall into the category of African studies. And my training involved classes in each of the geographical regions of the continent: Eastern, Southern, Central, Equatorial, Western, and Northern Africa. I even took a seminar in Malgache or Madagascan history, that huge Indian Ocean island off the east coast of Africa. If you looked at the map and you've seen that really large island, that is Madagascar or Malgache. The courses were part of a program that was interdisciplinary, including political science, languages, oral and written African literature, and it was African literature in my minor African studies field. I was part of a graduate program in comparative world history, Africa, at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, started by the now late Philip D. Curtin and Jan Van Sina. They were among my mentors, along with my brilliant advisor, double PhD, Steve Fireman. It was exceptionally rigorous and remains so. African or Africana studies, the distinction has significance, is, like the continent of Africa, capacious. My African American courses were separate. I was therefore trained in two specific fields with independent and interdependent, sometimes overlapping, content. Race mattered, yet scholarship defined the labor. So I wanted to get that out of the way. I had a colleague once who referred somewhat disparagingly, though I think he would not have copped to it, what he talked about what I did as Black stuff. It's a little bit more than that. So I just want to put that out there. A second point is that African-American history, like African-American lit or diasporic studies, is not a subset of anything else, any more than are African-Americans a subculture in the United States or in the Western Hemisphere, for that matter. I mention this because there are well-established global habits of minimizing Black presence and, in turn, Black experience. This is evident in emphasizing relatively small numbers in certain places, leading to minoritization as a practice. One must be made to think small and then to act similarly. I was never in the minority in the community in which I was raised, in my neighborhood, or in my school or household. It was the so-called larger society that constituted a minority in my nominally integrated neighborhood. This was because realtors and speculators practiced blockbusting to frighten whites into selling their homes with the canard that Black homebuyers would diminish the values of their houses. In the face of such white flight, some courageous white community members refused to abandon their plots and Black neighbors. Only when I ventured out into a wider and whiter world through the putative benefits of integration did that minoritization occur. When it happened, it amounted to cognitive dissonance that has left scars and still open wounds that I carry on my journey, like many other people. My first teachers in African American history, culture, and literature were my parents and maternal grandmother. My father introduced me to Joel Augustus Rogers through his self-published volumes, From Superman to Man, Sex and Race, World's Great Men of Color, and 100 Amazing Facts about the Negro. My mother made a point of taking me backstage whenever we went to a Broadway play or a concert. Thus I met James Earl Jones. Mom took me backstage. Let's do this. My grandmother took me to a meeting for the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, the ASNLH, as it was then known, founded by Carter G. Woodson, who started the Journal of Negro History in 1916, and in the 1920s advocated the commemoration of a Negro History Week in February, the month Frederick Douglass, Abraham Lincoln, and George Washington had celebrated their birthdays. The idea was to reflect upon the contributions of people of African descent, not only to the United States, but to human civilization writ large, from antiquity onward. My parents were remarkably rooted in their appreciation of their heritage. Mother worked close to the United Nations in the late 50s and early 60s, and was impressed by the African diplomats she would see in traditional regional attire in and out of the UN. My parents saw the Ballets Africains, the national dance company of Guinea, during their first tour of the US and world in 1958. When Sékou Touré took the bold move of breaking with France and voting no, that he was not going to be part of the French community. He was going to vote for independence. And the French retaliated by taking everything. They took light bulbs, they took toilet paper, they took everything from the Guineans. So the Guineans, one of the things that they do was created this ballet company, this national cultural company, to try to gain support and visibility throughout the world. And my parents were right there watching that. Among our small but evocative record collection was the French Vogue soundtrack of that riveting performance, along with Drums of Passion by Babatunde Olatunji. In the late 60s, my parents enrolled in a Kiswahili class at New York University in the square downtown, while I had matriculated in the Heights campus, then in the West Bronx. In the 60s, the forceful Black Power movement pushed for expanding and reconfiguring Negro History Week to Black and in time Afro and African American History Month. Bear in mind that both Afro and African American were terms used by what were called race activists in the late 19th century. So these were acts of reclamation. Following Reconstruction, many race men and women saw the need to actively defend their lives and reputations as people of African descent. It was out of this keen, self-preservative desire that a militant vindication movement arose. Carter Woodson became one of its exponents. He was inspired by contemporaries like W.B. Du Bois, William Monroe Trotter, Ida B. Wells, and of course the old guard like Frederick Douglass. The collective efforts of all these folk, rank and file, formerly enslaved, newly literate, and college, seminary, and university trained alike, created conditions for people like my maternal grandmother, Ella Wilma Allen Metcalf, Oklahoma Chickasaw Friedman, to take me to the ASA NLH meeting and plant the seeds for what would become a professional career. I stand on their shoulders. That's a small thumbnail sketch of a much larger story. It's a story about how I came to something, but it also centers around the question of how this commemoration came to be. In Britain, there is another calendar for Black people. So there's another month. In Britain, Black History Month is in August because that's the anniversary of the landing of the Windrush, where many people were coming from the West Indies, especially Jamaica, after World War II, around 1947, 48. So these chronologies are important, but they differ depending upon locality. Now I want to say something else. Okay? I want to say what I have said thus far kind of situates me in a professional sense, but also in a personal sense. But I also live in a particular place, right? I want to take this a bit further. My family moved to Santa Cruz over 30 years ago. We have been witnesses to and participants in many movements here and elsewhere. My partner and I raised 3 children here. It was not easy. They are adults with their own families and partnerships many miles away. As recently as a year ago, we in the Black community of Santa Cruz observed a historic first, a new low, when, after having been elected, one of 2 African-American city council members was recalled in an ugly, expensive, divisive, mean-spirited, ultimately tragic episode in the history of this city. Not merely because it occurred, but because it was not acknowledged, not openly discussed for what it was, an instance in which race was the elephant in the room. That is how race is often treated in Santa Cruz, by being sidestepped and swept under the rug. When it is identified for what it is, the messenger and the message risk being silenced. Politics permits voters to use the franchise in order that their voices be heard according to a calendar pertaining to an office. A small town with modest fiscal resources does not need to spend any of them on a process that contravenes standard electoral practice. This is about more than controversy. It illustrates blatant hypocrisy. It is vital to keep our eyes open and weigh in on what is right and what is not, whatever the consequences. The recall was not right, was not worth the expenditure, and its memory will not fade away. No one ever gets a free pass for evading and avoiding a difficult conversation. The ghosts of that shameful chapter will haunt us until we face it in the bright light of day and do not hide it like other dirty linen, betraying intolerance. Until then, it is the responsibility of those who can do so to speak the truth about it. So, I'm going to pause there and look at what I had to say in totality. We have lots of time for back and forth, for questions, for response, whatever. I'm actually under time because I don't want to monopolize this time. I don't want to just talk I want to have a conversation. But I thought everything that I shared was part of a whole. And in order to be frank, to be real, to speak with integrity, I wanted to put it all out there. And if you want to know more about why I said what I said, the way that I said it, we can go there too. So, Elaine, over to you.
Thank you, Professor Anthony. Let's give him a round of applause before we jump into the questions. Thank you. Thank you for your message. If you'd like to ask the professor a question, please, you can post it in the chat and I will let them know what the question is and if anybody has anything they want to ask.
Looks like Brenda has her hand up.
Oh.
Looks like Brenda
Okay.
Whitley has her hand up.
Yes.
Hi, Brenda. Yes.
Sorry, I'm trying to get all this together. I just wanted to say I appreciate your words that you just spoke about the incident with the city council. I would have loved to have heard those sooner than later because I kind of feel like it's going to get swept under the table. But I'm glad that you see it as I saw it. It is what it is, and nobody really wants to talk about it, unfortunately. That was it.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think many people feel this way, and it's important to verbalize it, to articulate it, not
Yes.
just carry it because it becomes part of our burden, and it's toxic.
Anne?
Thank you, Elaine, and thank you, Professor Anthony. It was beautiful to hear of such a great, rich history that you shared with us. And as being a member of the Commission on the Prevention of Violence Against Women, I saw the recall in a very ugly, deep way. And I encourage people to read the chapter in White Fragility about a white woman's tears. That to me really spoke to the issue of what happened, and everyone rushed to the city manager's assistant, Susie O'Hara, and all of a sudden, everybody's so upset about her tears, and it, you know, it was the most painful. I've lived in this town for 45 years, and the more I know of city politics and the things I get close to, it just gets so ugly and it's so corrupt. And it's and that passage just yesterday of this homeless living outdoor ordinance has just got me in a spin. And I'm hoping that we can work together as a community to try to bring about change. And I'll send something to Brenda, but it just makes me very sad that we can't work closer together as a community. And I just want to thank you so much for bringing that up, because it was so ugly, and people don't talk about it enough either, I don't think. And I had a workplace harassment suit brought on me because I did speak up about it. And, you know, I'm telling you, it's just, you know, it's like one of those things. We can't let it get swept under the rug, because what they've done now is they have a slate of pro business, you know, council members that are just wrecking havoc in our community. That's what I'll just say that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, it is important to speak truth to power and to recognize where power resides, and what interests reveal themselves in the name of the people. Thank you.
Any other questions? Enid? You're muted.
Thank you very much. I'd like Professor Anthony to discuss why he has brought it up in the way he has. You said, I can go there if you would like me to, and I would certainly like you to. Thank you very much.
Well, there's always a backstory, right? And in this particular instance, a couple of things have happened. One is I've just, like many other people, but I'm speaking for myself now, I've just been very, very angry about this for a year. And it was a year of all kinds of other ugliness, much of which was acknowledged and stimulated people to action. But sometimes it was more comfortable for folks to take action about issues that appeared to be more distant. That is, They could look at something that happened thousands of miles away or hundreds of miles away and say, that's wrong. That's wrong what happened to Breonna Taylor. That's wrong what happened to George Floyd. But not necessarily use that same critical eye to consider what happens in their own backyard. And I felt that the situation in the recall was one of those instances in which something happened where people said, well, these were controversial people. What about that fool in the White House? We have a lot of controversies that we have just somehow managed to swallow and wait for. Let's wait for the next election. You couldn't wait? You couldn't wait? Why was it so important? Why was it so necessary that people had to create a movement, pool their financial resources to remove these voices that they found uncomfortable? If it really was the will of the people to unseat them, to replace them, that's what elections are for. There had to be something else behind that. And that was just so clear. And I think it's clear to many people. Now, in the short run, there's a book that has been commissioned about the last year. And some people were invited to contribute to that book. I was one of those people. I was invited to write an introduction. I did. And in the introduction, I had a paragraph about the recall. Within days of the closure of sort of debate on what was going to be in that book, where it was about to be put to bed, go into press, I saw the galleys. And lo and behold, that paragraph had been excised with no explanation. And I asked about it. And I was told that several editors, something like 6 editors, agreed that the piece was better without it. I have never in my life found 6 editors agree on anything. 6 editors won't agree on the time of the sun rising and setting. So I had some real issues about it. And I wanted to make sure that whatever happens with that final version, which I have not seen, that people understood that there is a story here that needs to be told. There is unfinished business that we are all carrying around and living with. And until and unless we face it, it's going to continue to tear us apart inside. It will not go away. Thank you for asking.
Thank you for telling.
Elaine, I would like to say something. Willow,
Yeah, I saw it. Willow, please.
is that okay? Okay.
Yes.
I would like to add another layer to this because at the time when people were attacking our friend and comrade, the Black man in the city council, the one of 2, one of the city council members, who's our supposed mayor now, infuriated me by saying, "Don't accuse me of racism. I've been an out lesbian for," I forget if she said 40 years or something. I've been an out lesbian for more decades than that, and enough to know that the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, queer movement has its foundations in the Black liberation struggle. And that we have to take a very strong anti-racist stand. So I'm still furious. You can hear my voice. I'm still furious that she said that she presented the queer movement as this reactionary, racist condition, and that she's our mayor and supposedly representing our city. And I just think it's really, really, really important. I talked to a number of queer people locally at the time and a number of non-queer people. I talked to a lot of people about that at the time. And I just realized that, I'm still really angry about it. And I still would really like her to be held accountable.
Well, thank you for your comment. I think the issue is that there's really not an opportunity for the community as a whole to speak about this. And if we don't speak about it as a whole, we don't confront it, there's no space for healing possible. I'm not going to single out any individual for what they believe, because everybody has a right to their beliefs. I don't think this is about what individual statements were made. I think it's about the collective silence and the manner in which advantage could be taken of that silence to justify wrongful acts on the sacrifice principle on the altar of expediency. So I think there's a lot going on, as you said, here. But I think, maybe we need our own Truth and Reconciliation Commission, because we haven't been truthful and we will not be reconciled until and unless that happens.
Are there any other questions? Yes, Anne?
I would love to hear more about your experiences of being bringing your children up here in Santa Cruz, if you would be so inclined to want to share that. You mentioned it, and it made me want to hear more. I'm curious about the music too, but but the piece about your family is interesting to me as someone who's lived here for 45 years.
Well, I think part of it has to do with the kinds of decisions that we made in the places that we chose to live. And when you move into a place, there are consequences, And one of the things that was evident very quickly was that this was a very homogeneous community in the manner in which it saw itself and situated itself. But part of that appearance of homogeneity also involved a certain degree of systematic erasure, purblindness. You could say colorblindness. Now, I think colorblindness is a very interesting term. People talk about one in colorblind societies, like misunderstanding, misconstruing what Dr. King and other people say. Colorblindness is an affliction. It is a malady. Okay? It's something you have to work around. It's a disability. It should not be something toward which you aspire. You should be able to recognize and affirm diversity, if you call it that, difference, whatever. The point is that one of the experiences that I had consistently throughout the decades that I lived in Santa Cruz is being confronted in a variety of situations, formal and informal, professional and neighborhood, where people would say, well, there are no Black people here. as they're looking at me. Now, what does that mean? Who are you talking to? What is wrong with your vision? I do wear glasses. Do you need them? Do you need a new prescription? You know, so part of it is coming to terms with that kind of erasure. And that kind of erasure operates on several different levels. It operates in schools, it operates in professional settings, it is a constant. So that just to be recognized as a human being who is present and not absent, who is counted, involves a great deal of insistence, agency, fortitude, consistency. So when you are raising children, you have to fold that into the omelet. The people who teach them have these attitudes. And you've got to figure out what will be your relationship to those people with whom you entrust the safety and part of the socialization of your children. Because classically, the teacher was considered to serve in loco parentis. We had to really be sure when we went back to school night that we were not only listening to the teachers, but that we were being fair and supportive of the children. Did they see them? Do they see us? There's a lot in that. So in some ways, this is another conversation which could take a much longer time. I'm glad you raised the question, but it does speak about the different realms that we occupy. We may be sharing certain social spaces, but that does not mean that our experiences are necessarily the same. We're not interchangeable parts. We're also not necessarily feeling that we should have to leave to make things more comfortable for other people. Rather, if we make a choice to be part of a community, then as a collective, we should be able to work out the business of living together, which includes disagreements, which includes understanding the distance between invisibility, visibility, participation, all kinds of things. But being part of a community means coming to terms with the choices that are made every day that you stay there. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Jinx, do you have a question? Yes, Bhavananda?
Okay, there you go.
Hi, Jinx.
I kept getting muted. David, I'm just sitting here wrestling with this article I just read in the New York Times, and points being taken that people there are saying they don't want to have to deal with being told that they're stop demanding that I admit to white privilege and work on my so-called implicit bias as a condition to my continued employment. And at Smith, apparently they're dealing with not only racism, but sexism, and a lot of the workers there are are, you know, it's a class issues too. And I'm just starting to just go, you know, there was a time when up at UCSC in politics, we discuss xenophobia. And I'm seeing that as the, you know, this othering, the constant othering, which seems to be a species issue. And how do we confront that? Rather than, because you know, why do the Black kids sit on the other side of the room, and, you know, trying to deal with the white you know, tenderness around this issue, and then hearing Black people say that somebody else is not Black enough. You know, it's just getting crazy around this, and it's going to end up, in my experience, in my 68 years of living in this world, I'm just seeing it's going to end up dissolving a really important issue. We need, you know, something a little better than, you know, going off in our camps. How do you feel?
Well, I'm the same age that you are, which is a blessing, because there's no guarantee that either of us would have reached this age or will reach another year. So I'm very grateful for that. I think that, you know, we all make sense of the world as we find it. And that also means that we choose our battlefields. The problem of what you describe as xenophobia is not an American issue. It's a global issue, right? It's been an issue in places like South Africa, you know, where, you know, Africans have issues with immigrant Africans. I mean, you know, this is a human problem. So I think part of what I'm hearing from you is to look at humanity as the center. How is it that we can figure out ways to share space? And I don't think there's a simple answer. I think it is a process. I think sometimes it is a process that leans in the direction of cooperation. Sometimes it's a process that leans in the direction of conflict. But you have these tendencies, you know, these shifts back and forth. And I think it can only be dealt with by debate, by open discussion, and by being as frank as you can be. You know, there are a lot of difficulties here. There are a lot of difficulties. You know, one difficulty I think has already been revealed in the question of sensitivity. You know, some people just don't want to hear certain things because it hurts. You know, there's a lot of hurt out there. And there's a lot more serious hurt than sometimes develops in a conversation. People being killed every day, you know, and they're being killed in shootouts, they're being killed also in policies, right? There are a lot of different ways that people can suffer. So I think part of the question is, if one is committed to making a difference, the best thing to do is to follow your heart. Do those things that matter. You have articulated something that matters to you. You are doing what is consistent and right for you. And I think that that's the best we can hope for. Being consistent, moving from integrity, moving from your heart space, moving from love. Understanding there will be disagreements. There will be people who disagree with me. There will be people who I disagree with. There will be people I don't like but I still need to figure out how to come to terms with sharing this space, as long as they're not pulling a gun on me. If they're doing that, conversation really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. You know, you know, that has happened to me in my life, right? And it happened to me with somebody who looked like me, you know, and fortunately, that was just a kind of show. But I didn't know that. Because this guy, when I was in a dorm room with a bunch of other guys watching television, I happened to make an offhanded remark. We were watching a program called Ironside, which you may remember. Raymond Burr was playing at the end of his career, a former district attorney who had been shot and became a quadriplegic and was in a wheelchair and depended upon an African American who had been incarcerated at one time. And the drama of every show revolved around this person. And in this particular show, someone pulled a gun on him and he talked his way out of it with the guy holding the gun on him. And I said at that time, I said, oh, this is television. You know, can you imagine that somebody pulls a gun on you and you just try to talk them out of it? And this guy, in whose room I was watching this program, along with other people, reaches into a drawer and he pulls out a gun and he points it at me. He said, let's see how you deal with it. We are in college. We're not in the street. He pulls his gun, he points it at me, and then he pulls the trigger. And then he pulls the trigger again. And then he pulls the trigger again. And then he pulls the trigger again. And then he pulls the trigger again and again. Fortunately, there was nothing in that chamber. But I didn't know that. And one of the people in the room said to me afterward, oh, so-and-so is crazy. We could say that was Russian roulette. Except in Russian roulette, there is one bullet in the chamber, but I didn't know. I felt that the issue at that point was a macho issue. He wanted to make me beg him not to shoot me. And I wasn't going to do that. Yeah, I was scared to death. 6 times he pulled that trigger. 6 times. College. And I got up and I walked out. Because for me, it was important to maintain that face, even though I was scared to death, literally. Anything could have happened at that time. And the thing that really struck me after all of that is that one of the people in that room spoke to me later on and he said, well, you know, if anything had happened, I would have had to support so-and-so. In other words, if I had gotten killed, he would have somehow found some way to support this other guy. What would that mean? Dragging my body away and burying me someplace? And I said, wow, this is not friendship. We were children, in a sense. We were outside of adolescence, but we were still in the space of doing crazy things. But I mention that story to say that this is a reality, this kind of precariousness, what the intellectuals call precarity, for so many people. It didn't make a difference that I was working on a degree. It doesn't make a difference now that I have a PhD. If I walk into the wrong place, if I'm stopped by the wrong cop, if I look at somebody wrong and they're packing, I'm done. So I have to be real when I'm talking about how we get together and how we don't get together. We do the best we can.
Thank you. Looks like we have time for maybe one more question. Ravananda?
Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you, Dr. Anthony. As always, I appreciate your richness. And I did have a question, but I'm so deeply moved by your story that I'm feeling it all through my body.
Mm-hmm.
And I am grateful to have witnessed this sharing of yours, because it deeply has moved into me and my being. And I'm deeply moved. I'm deeply moved. My question is a tag on to what Enid asked you. It's kind of like a Sankofa moment when you were talking about the city council and how that impacted you and your feelings around that. I was listening and appreciative to have that sharing of yours, number one. Number two, when I used the reference Sankofa, I know that we have to go back to mend and heal, as you said, and to restore before we can move forward. And I was curious with when you talk about community and that we have been impacted by that experience. How do you see us being able to come together? And that is what I want to know. What have you imagined that, how can we do that? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Amanda. I've been struggling with this. I've been struggling to try to envision what might be possible because I think there is so much denial about this. There is no will to come together to resolve this because some people think it's already resolved. The people who mounted the campaign imagined that they won. Therefore, end of story. There's nothing else to talk about for them. So first, there has to be some sense of common need, common purpose for a dialogue about this. What did this do? And how do we, in fact, move forward? You cannot move forward unless you move through it. So the way that I imagine it could be at least a conversation. But I don't really know how to get there given the distance between those who may think that it's done and they won, and those who know that it isn't and that we lost as a community, not just Black folk, we as Santa Cruz. That has besmirched our collective identity. It has hurt our heart. And until and unless we acknowledge that, we need some open heart surgery because we had a heart attack.
Thank you for that great question, Bhavananda. Thank you, Professor Anthony. Do we have any other questions? Enid? You're muted.
Yeah, I know you said this was the last, and I'm following your direction, and I just want to put something out based on what Professor Anthony just said. He asked, how can this be done? And then he provided 2 questions. What did this do? How do we move forward? And in my view, those 2 questions can shape the conversation to continue the conversation. Those 2 questions, I'm just putting it forward because in a spirit of looking at Black history, to look at Black history locally would be a valuable thing. That is historical, and it's local, and it's Black, and it's everything else. So I just want to say that's what I heard in his remark. And in the spirit of speaking truth and seeking reconciliation, those 2 questions, in my view, could shape a conversation that could be useful. So thank you for allowing me to say that. That's just what I had to say. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you for that.
Any other questions, comments? We have a couple minutes. If not, I want to take the time to thank you, Professor Anthony, for your words today. As always, they're rich, and you leave us, you bring to us, and you leave us with much to think about and much to ponder, and you know, and moves us beyond our comfort zones, right? And so I personally thank you for that. And I want to thank you again for taking the time this evening to speak with us as we continue to celebrate Black History Month in Santa Cruz County. On behalf of the local branch of the NAACP, we thank you. I personally thank you and honor you as a friend and a brother and a mentor. And if we don't have any other questions, I would like to wish everybody a good night.
I want to thank everyone for coming. I want to thank the NAACP for the invitation. I want to thank you for your concentration, your participation in this process of building community, because that's what matters.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Take care all. Stay safe, healthy, get your jabs. And
Thank you.
Thank you so very much.
move on.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Mhm. Thank you for being here, Willow.
I try to get to everything that Professor Anthony does, and I've been on a huge number of webinars and meetings and stuff this month, and we just need Black history to be all the time. One thing that struck me, Dr. Anthony, was when you were talking about August. That was very interesting. That I think, were you saying in Britain August is Black History Month? And I thought it was just a curious overlap that we do have an important celebration here in August, the Black August. So of course, they come from very different historical roots, why they developed, but it's interesting to me that we both have really important historical developments in Black History in August?
Well, there are synergies if you know, all one has to do is look at a calendar and find them. But that's a very specific experience that has been recognized and commemorated in that month.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it was a case of invisibility and erasure. And that was the corrective to that. If you have been watching the series called Small Acts by Stephen Queen, he is addressing the Black presence in Britain.